Well, back in 1982, the BBC comedy Yes Minister took a closer look at the issue of equality in Whitehall, some 3 years after the country had elected Margaret Thatcher as its first female Prime Minister. Writers Anthony Jay and Jonathan Lynn had the Minister, Jim Hacker, decide to do something positive about hiring women.
I have made a policy decision. I'm going to do something about the number of women in the civil service.
Oh, surely there aren't all that many.
You can't get my point, Humphrey.
The Minister thinks we need more, sir.
Many more.
More? Oh, well, we're actually quite well up to establishment on typists and cleaners and tea ladies. Any ideas, Bernard?
We are a bit short on temporary secretaries.
I'm talking about permanent secretaries. We need some female mandarins.
Sort of Satsumas, Minister.
As kitten heels once again dominate the corridors of power, The Times is reporting today that even our second female Prime Minister, Theresa May, has been the recipient of mansplaining, defined in the online dictionary as the way a man explains something to a woman, in a manner regarded as condescending or patronising. Apparently some civil servants and others have dared to mansplain Theresa May, but is it because she's a woman? Aisha Hazarika was a special advisor for the former Labour leader Ed Miliband and Chief of Staff for Harriet Harman. And Ann Widdecombe is a former minister for the Conservative Party. Ann, you first. Mansplaining is not new. Did you experience it during your time in Whitehall?
No, absolutely not. But first of all, I'm not so sensitive. And secondly, I made a positive practice of saying to my civil servants when I was about to be briefed, I used to begin by saying, right, treat me like an idiot. Because that way there was no possibility at all that they would just assume a level of knowledge or a level of understanding that wasn't there. And it's much better to be told something that you already know than not to be told something that you don't know and end up confused. But I also think there's an awful lot of nonsense here. It's not about sexism. Some people do explain things from the very start to people, and yes, it can be a bit irritating. They do it to men as well, and women do it to men. It's not just man-woman.
Aisha, you've gone from the Labour Party to stand-up comedy. Is mansplaining something you've had experience of within politics and outside?
Oh, absolutely. I've had loads of experience of mansplaining, and I've seen sort of senior female politicians have it as well. I mean, I've also used to work in business, and I would see a lot of mansplaining as well. And the other thing you would see often when, there's not many women in the room, as the only woman in the room, sometimes when you would say something, it would sort of get ignored, and then you'd hear your words repeated back by a man, and everyone would be like, "Oh, that was what insight, Giles. That was amazing." So I do think there is still quite a lot of structural sexism within, government and politics and business and the media. I think that is something. I think that it's changing, but I've just been at a conference down at the Fawcett Society up in Manchester, and we've just had a big discussion about that. And I think it's something that a lot of women still feel in the workplace.
And do you think women politicians now are more sensitive to the idea of being patronised, that Theresa May, as the Times suggests, if it's the case, is less likely to tolerate being patronised in 2016 than perhaps female ministers in earlier decades?
Well, if indeed she ever did complain about mansplaining, which isn't fully established, I'd be disappointed if she did, because I think this is all part of a quite false manufacture of grievance. I think back to the 70s when women's lib was really about something. It was absolutely lawful when I was graduating for employers to advertise a job with two rates of pay alongside them, one for a man and one for a woman. It was perfectly lawful to refuse financial arrangements to somebody just because she was a woman. Those were the facts of life, and we had real inequalities to fight. I think nowadays it's almost the case that women are looking for grievances.
Even Theresa May? Even number 10?
As I say, first of all, I'm not at all convinced that she actually complained about mansplaining as such. If so, I would be very disappointed. I just think, particularly in the case of women who've reached the height of politics, who are holding high office, for heaven's sake, surely they've got other things to worry about.
Aisha, what do you think can be done to combat mansplaining, if indeed it is the problem that many say it is?
Well, I have, as imagine, a very different view. Just to pick up on something that Anne said, I think there is still a lot for the women's movement to fight against. There is still a pay gap Childcare is still a huge issue which has not been resolved in public policy terms. And let's not forget domestic violence is still one of the biggest killers of women in this country. So I don't think we're in a feminist nirvana at all. I think in terms of mansplaining, it's about getting more women into the room. It's about having more women in politics at every level, not just the front of house. That's very important. Politicians, cabinet ministers, also senior civil servants and political advisors as well. Special advisors, political advisors have a lot of influence. I think it's very interesting that lots of stuff that's written up about Theresa May at the moment is all attributed to Nick Timothy, who is one of her chiefs of staff. And sometimes you read pieces and you think, it's almost written up like Theresa May is sort of some sort of passive provider of the line that Nick Timothy comes up with. So I think even culturally in our media, we're still very much like, who is the man pulling the strings behind Theresa May? I think Theresa, look, I'm not a Conservative supporter, obviously I'm a Labour person, but she is the Prime Minister. She's obviously a pretty bright woman and tenacious woman to have got there. The idea that her male special advisor is sort of telling her what to say is quite insulting.
And the idea that she would need to worry about it is even more foolish. I simply think that we will never be credible in senior positions as women if we're forever looking for these sorts of sources of grievance. I mean, as I say, lots of people over-explain things. I've probably over-explained things to people before now who haven't answered me back because perhaps they were junior to me. I've probably done that. They probably felt patronised, but it wasn't because I was a woman and he or she was a man or a woman. It was just because I over-explained. Calm down, everybody. Forget the grievances.
And
start concentrating on what matters.
We're running out of time. I have a very brief question for you. As a former star of Strictly, do you think Ed Balls should bow out gracefully at tonight's quarterfinals?
Absolutely not. If the public want him, the public should get what they want, just as they should over Brexit.
Thank you very much indeed, Ann Widdecombe and Aisha Azarika. If you thought families here...